You've been trained to believe that explaining yourself is virtue. That if you're innocent, you clarify. If you're misunderstood, you elaborate. If someone's upset, you translate your intentions like a polite defendant trying to earn mercy. That training makes you predictable, and predictable men get handled. Here's the lens shift. The moment you explain yourself, you accept an inferior position. Not because explanations are bad, but because the act of explaining usually happens only after someone else has already seized the courtroom. They raised an eyebrow, implied a flaw, questioned your decision, or just wanted to understand. And you, thinking you're being mature, start building them a case file. You don't notice the real transaction. You think you're exchanging information. You're actually exchanging rank. In social warfare, the person who forces another to justify controls the frame. They don't need facts. They need you to respond. Response is movement. Movement is obedience. And once you're moving, they're directing. Most men don't lose power dramatically. They lake it in sentences. You explain why you didn't answer quickly. You explain why you said what you said. You explain why you made that choice. You explain why you deserve basic respect. Every explanation is a small kneel. I recognize your authority to audit me. That's the poison. Authority isn't claimed by shouting. It's granted by who gets interrogated. This chapter is about installing a different operating system. You stop treating life like a misunderstanding that needs clearing up. You start treating it like territory that must be held. So you need one brutal distinction. Clarifying is when you voluntarily provide a necessary detail to a neutral party for a practical outcome. Explaining is when you provide unnecessary detail to reduce someone else's suspicion, anger, or judgment. Clarifying is a tool. Explaining is a reflex, and reflexes are what predators hunt. When someone wants your explanation, what they often want is your posture. If you start sounding eager, careful, defensive, or overly logical, you've already told them your internal hierarchy. Their perception of you matters more than your command of yourself. This is why reasonable men get punished. They keep showing their neck. A powerful frame is colder. You don't rush to be understood. You decide what's worth understanding. You don't treat every accusation as a fire to put out. You treat accusations as probes, hands testing for softness. This is the lens shift you will carry through the entire script. Explanations don't increase trust. They increase access. The more you explain, the more material you give them to reinterpret, weaponize, or remember differently. You think you're closing the issue. You're feeding it. The one who talks more is usually the one being processed. Not always. Sometimes silence is cowardice. But in power dynamics, excessive verbal output is often a sign of seeking permission to exist. You're not on trial unless you step into the courtroom. Most conflicts are invitations to self-demote. The trap isn't the topic. The trap is your participation. This chapter isn't about becoming mute. It's about a surgical repositioning. You stop presenting yourself as a man who needs to be validated as good. Because good is a leash in modern social games. Good means compliant, explainable, correctable. A domesticated animal performs innocence. A sovereign man doesn't. Your new standard is simple. You don't defend your identity. You enforce your boundaries. You don't argue your value. You demonstrate your criteria. And when you feel the familiar itch to justify, when your chest tightens, when you want to clear your name, when you want them to just get it, you recognize what's happening. They've touched your need to be approved. That need is the handle. This chapter installs the first rule of the frame. If they want you explaining, they want you beneath them. Your job is not to win their understanding. Your job is to keep the initiative. Think justification is communication. It isn't. Justification is a ritual of compliance. It signals you accept their right to grade you. That's the mechanism. The moment you justify, you step into their frame, where they are the evaluator and you are the applicant. You start arguing your intentions, your reasons, your context, like context ever saved a man once the verdict is emotionally decided. In power dynamics, people rarely listen to your explanation to understand you. They listen to locate your weakness, because explanations reveal three things. Predators need what you fear losing: approval, belonging, reputation, access. What you'll tolerate: disrespect, interrogation, shifting standards. How easily you can be moved: guilt, urgency, confusion. When you justify, you expose your operating system. You show them which buttons work. Notice the structure of the trap. It usually starts with something small: an eyebrow, a why, a casual doubt. The content is irrelevant. The goal is to get you to begin talking from underneath. Once you do, the escalation becomes automatic. You give a reason. They don't accept it, because acceptance was never the point. You give a better reason. Now you are negotiating your right to choose. At that point, they've won. Not because their argument is superior, but because you accepted the premise that your decisions require their approval. This is why being transparent is not always noble. Transparency is a virtue only among equals. In unequal games, transparency is intelligence leakage. You're handing out your map to people who want your territory. And here's the uglier inversion. The more you explain, the guiltier you look. Not logically, socially. Explanation carries the scent of defense. Defense implies threat. Threat implies wrongdoing. That's why crowds, institutions, and low-status minds interpret elaboration as confession. A sovereign man understands a cold truth. Perception punishes movement. The man who stands still looks certain. The man who scrambles looks cornered. So what replaces justification? Not rudeness, not rage, not alpha theatrics. Those are still reactions, still proof you can be steered. The replacement is framing, short statements that establish reality without pleading for agreement. The difference is surgical. Justification says, "Let me prove I'm not wrong." Framing says, "This is what I'm doing." Justification says, "Here's my whole internal process." Framing says, "That's not up for discussion." Justification says, "Please don't see me badly." Framing says, "Your perception is your responsibility." Your goal is to stop feeding the interrogator's appetite, because once someone learns you will justify, they will keep charging you rent for existing. And understand this: interrogation is a dominance move disguised as concern. The phrasing is often soft: "Help me understand. I'm just asking." Why would you do that? Soft words, hard intent. It's a probe for compliance. When you answer with a full explanation, you reward the probe. You teach them the technique works. Next time, they probe earlier, harder, in front of others. Because now it's not about the decision, it's about making you perform. This mechanism is everywhere. In relationships, one partner becomes the judge, the other becomes the defendant. In workplaces, alignment becomes permission-seeking. In families, respect becomes a tax paid in explanations. The rule is simple and cruel. Whoever requires justification is claiming rank. If you accept it reflexively, you are volunteering for the lower position. In the next chapter, you'll learn the specific archetypes who live off this dynamic, so you can spot them before you start bleeding words. You don't get dragged into justification by people. You get dragged in by types. Same instincts, same tactics, different faces. Once you can name them, you stop treating the interrogation like a unique situation and start treating it like a familiar predator circling. Archetype 1, the moral prosecutor. He doesn't want clarity. He wants confession. He speaks in righteousness and pretends his judgment is principle. He frames your choices as character defects, so you'll scramble to prove you're a good man. Then he owns you with your own words. Tells, loaded language, real men don't, forced apologies, public virtue signaling, escalating standards, sudden memory of values when it benefits him. Archetype 2, the concerned interrogator. Soft voice, clean hands, dirty intent. He says he's just worried, just trying to understand, just checking in. What he's checking is whether you'll hand him authority for free. Tells, questions that don't lead to solutions, repeated why after you've answered, emotional disappointment as leverage, concern used as a crowbar. Archetype 3, the passive-aggressive auditor. He doesn't accuse, he implies. He drops little needles and waits for you to bleed explanations. He wants you off balance, correcting a story he never stated out loud. Tells, I guess. Whatever you say. Interesting? Sarcasm masked as calm, vague disapproval, timing his comments when others can hear. Archetype 4, the status fisher. This one interrogates to locate your rank. He doesn't care what you did. He cares how you react. If you justify, he logs you as manageable. If you stay clean and concise, he recalibrates and becomes polite. Tells, pushes boundaries early, tests you with trivial challenges, asks for details that don't concern him, watches your face more than your words. Archetype 5, the friend who competes. He'll never call it competition. He'll call it keeping you humble. He asks questions that sound supportive, but are designed to make you explain your ambition, apologize for your wins, or expose your plans so he can undermine them. Tells, curiosity spikes when you're improving, jokes that reduce your progress, sudden skepticism, I'm just being real right after you share something important. Archetype 6, the bureaucratic extractor, not emotional, efficient. This is the institutional version. Manager, committee, group chat, policy person. They demand context until you bury yourself in details. Then they pick one sentence, remove it from its body, and use it as a weapon. Tells, endless documentation requests, shifting goalposts for transparency language, selective quoting, forcing you to defend yourself in writing. Archetype 7, the intimate controller. This one uses closeness as entitlement. If you loved me, you'd explain. He turns access into ownership. He turns your silence into guilt. He wants to be the permanent judge inside your private life. Tells, interrogation disguised as trust, punishing you for boundaries, demanding emotional labor as proof of loyalty, turning your tone into the issue when your decision is firm. Here's what links all 7. They don't chase truth. They chase leverage. Your explanation is raw material. They refine it into narratives, obligations, and control. And the fastest way to identify the type in front of you is simple. Do your answers reduce the pressure or increase it? If every explanation creates another demand for explanation, you're not in a conversation, you're in an extraction. They will also use a specific escalation pattern, private question to mild doubt, to moral framing to public exposure. The moment the interrogation turns performative, when it happens in front of others, in a thread, in a group, you're no longer being asked, you're being ranked. Next chapter, you'll see why this works so reliably across history and human nature. Why reasonable men become easy targets, and why silence terrifies people who need control. The world rewards outcomes, not intentions. Your intentions are invisible. Your posture isn't. That's why explanation fails as a defense mechanism. Human beings don't process status with logic first. They process it with instinct. Who is calm? Who is certain? Who is moving? Who is begging? Who is trying to be believed? The moment you start working to be seen as good, you announce the fear underneath. You're afraid of their verdict, and fear is always louder than your words. In groups, the reasonable man becomes prey for a simple reason. He offers the tribe a convenient sacrifice. When tension rises, office politics, family conflict, social circles, people look for someone who will absorb blame cleanly, not the loud predator, not the chaotic liar, the man who explains, the man who tries to be fair, the man who will keep talking until the room feels settled. They don't choose him because he's guilty. They choose him because he's processable. That's the first deepening. Explanation turns you into a container for other people's discomfort. You become the sponge. You think you're being mature. They think you're available. History runs on this pattern. Courts didn't demand confession because confession created truth. They demanded confession because confession created control. Once a man explains, he's inside their language, their categories, their definitions. They don't need to defeat him. They just need him to participate. And you're participating every time you say, "Let me clarify." That's not what I meant. You have to understand. I only did it because those sentences sound harmless. Socially, they sound like retreat. Here's the second deepening. The more you explain, the more angles you create for attack. A simple decision becomes a multi-sentence story. A story has seams. Seams can be pulled. Every additional detail becomes something they can reinterpret, doubt, or quote back to you later with a different tone. You meant it one way. They'll replay it another way. And now you're arguing about language instead of controlling reality. This is why institutions love explanation. Because explanation creates paperwork. Paperwork creates process. Process creates leverage. Once you're on the record, you're not a man anymore. You're a file. Even in personal life, explanation becomes a weapon in the hands of someone who wants a dominance. They'll store your words like ammunition. So you admitted you were stressed. So you said you weren't sure. So you acknowledged you might be wrong. You thought you were being honest. They heard, soft spot located. Third deepening. The crowd hates uncertainty. An explanation smells like uncertainty. Certainty is rare. Rare things attract obedience. Explanation is you trying to manufacture certainty after the fact. It's retroactive control. And people feel that. This is the cold paradox. Silence often reads as innocence. Explanation often reads as guilt. Not because silence proves anything, because silence implies you don't need their belief to stand. And that posture is what the room respects, especially rooms full of insecure people. Now connect the dots to human nature. Most people aren't evil masterminds. They're worse. They're hungry animals with good vocabulary. They want advantage, relief, and status with minimal cost. If you make it easy to push you into justification, they'll do it without thinking. Not to ruin you, just to elevate themselves. So the threat isn't one villain. The threat is a system, a world that punishes men who negotiate their existence. And once you're known as the man who explains, you will be given endless trials. They'll question your decisions for clarity. They'll reinterpret your tone for respect. They'll demand emotional disclosures for trust. They'll invite you to meetings to align. It's all the same transaction. Pay with words, lose with posture. This chapter's psychological outcome is simple. You stop expecting fairness. You stop expecting people to weigh your reasons like a judge. You begin operating on the real rule. Frames don't argue. Frames replace. Next, you'll learn what to do instead. How to respond without feeding the courtroom. How to move like a sovereign without turning into a noisy brute. You don't win power games by being right. You win by controlling what the conversation is allowed to be. Explanation is you accepting their arena. Framing is you building the arena and letting them decide whether they can survive inside it. The strategic shift is mechanical. Remove the courtroom, install the border. Courts require evidence, narratives, motives. Borders require only one thing: enforcement. So your responses stop being stories. They become declarations. 1. Use the verdict sentence. One line, no oxygen. When you feel pulled into defending yourself, you deliver a short line that ends the debate instead of feeding it. Examples: that's the decision. I'm not discussing that. I'm not available for this conversation. You don't have enough context to evaluate it. The goal isn't to convince. The goal is to signal finality. Finality is status. Rambling is submission. 2. Use controlled silence. Like a closed blade. Silence isn't empty. It's pressure. Most people can't tolerate it, so they fill it with concessions, jokes, anger, anything. That tells you who is trying to control whom. Rules. Answer slower, not faster. Let a challenge hang in the air. Don't rescue their discomfort. Silence is how you force the other person to reveal intent. If they wanted clarity, they'll ask cleanly. If they wanted dominance, they'll escalate. Either way, you get information without paying with posture. 3. The broken record. Repeat, reduce, refuse. Interrogators don't stop because you answered. They stop when they realize you can't be milked. Pick one sentence and repeat it without emotional variation. I'm not explaining that. That's not up for debate. No. No extra words. No different phrasing. Variation is bargaining. Bargaining is whackness. Repetition is a wall. 4. Name the game. Label the move, not the topic. When someone disguises control as concern, you don't argue the content. You expose the tactic. Examples: this feels like an interrogation, not a conversation. You're asking for justification, not information. You're trying to make me defend myself. I'm not doing that. That one line pulls the mask off. Some back down. The ones who don't were never acting in good faith. Now you know. 5. Replace. Because, with criteria. Because invites counter-arguments. Criteria ends them, instead of, I can't because I'm busy. Use, I don't take calls after 7, instead of, I chose this because it makes sense. Use, I choose based on results, not opinions. Criteria turns your life from a negotiation into a policy. Policies don't need approval. 6. Use exit tactics. Leave before you bleed words. The highest status move isn't the perfect line. It's the refusal to stay in a degrading frame. Examples: we're done here. I'm stepping out. Talk to me when you can speak directly. I'm not continuing this. Then you actually leave. Hanging around after declaring boundaries is like drawing a sword and asking permission to swing. 7. Keep a clean record. No emotional confessions as currency. Many men explain because they're trying to prove purity. I meant well. I was stressed. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Those are not defenses. Those are handles. Your rule: never pay for peace with self-incrimination. If you make a mistake, correct it. If you owe something, pay it. But don't spill your inner world to earn mercy from people who enjoy watching you kneel. This chapter's outcome is practical. You stop acting like a man seeking acquittal. You start acting like a man enforcing territory. In the next chapter, the final piece gets installed: the identity death. Because the explainer isn't a behavior. It's a self-image. The man who needs to be understood to feel safe. The need to explain isn't a communication habit. It's an identity. The man who survives by being understood. He believes clarity earns safety. He believes if he can just present his reasons cleanly enough, the world will be fair. That man is already captured, because fairness is not the operating system of human groups. Rank is, perception is, hunger is. When you live as the understandable man, you volunteer to be processed by every insecure person who needs a target, every mediocre authority who needs compliance, every intimate tyrant who needs you small. So this chapter is an execution, not of your voice, of your dependency. The death stops seeking absolution. The explainer speaks like a defendant, even when nobody said court. He anticipates accusation. He preemptively clarifies. He floods the room with context like it's disinfectant. But context doesn't disinfect. It dilutes your authority. You must kill the internal fantasy that people are owed access to your motives. Motives are private. Motives are soft tissue. In war, you don't expose soft tissue. New rule: your reasons are not public property. If you disclose reasons, it is because it serves your objective, not because it eases someone else's emotions. That's sovereignty, not hostility. Sovereignty is simply refusing to be managed. The autopsy: why you keep doing it. The explainer believes one of these lies. If I don't explain, I'll look guilty. If I don't explain, I'll lose the relationship. If I don't explain, they'll misunderstand me. If I don't explain, I'm being unfair. All of them hide the same fear: rejection. Not emotional rejection, status rejection. The fear of being placed outside the group, outside approval, outside the warm illusion of being one of the good ones. Predators sense that fear. Bureaucrats monetize it. Controllers weaponize it. The explainer becomes a vending machine. Insert accusation. Receive justification. This is the identity you're replacing. The replacement: become the man who doesn't need agreement. A sovereign man doesn't beg reality to cooperate. He states reality and moves accordingly. He doesn't need everyone to like his decision. He needs his decision to stand. So you install a new self-image. You are not nice. You are clear. You are not understandable. You're decisive. You are not open. You are selective. You are not fair. You are consistent. Consistency is what weak people call cold, because it can't be negotiated. The ritual. The 3 vows. When you feel the reflex to justify, heart speed, throat tight, urgency to correct the narrative, you execute a simple internal ritual. No drama. Surgery. Vow 1. I do not argue my worth. If someone tries to make you prove value, you exit or enforce. Worth is demonstrated over time, not litigated in a moment. Vow 2. I do not confess to earn peace. You correct what is true, You deny what is false, and you never spill additional blood to convince an audience that already wants to drink it. Vow 3. I do not live inside other people's interpretations. Their story about you is not your home. If they insist on their story, let them keep it alone. This is where most men fail. They hear this and imagine becoming a statue, unreachable, emotionless, mysterious. That's not power, that's performance. Power is simpler. You stop negotiating your right to choose. The test: tolerate being misunderstood. Here is the price of the new identity. You will be misunderstood on purpose by small minds. They will say you're defensive because you won't explain. They will say you're arrogant because you won't plead. They will say you've changed because you stopped being easy. Good. Let them talk. Noise is what weak people produce when they can't control you. Your nervous system will crave the old drug, relief through explanation. You must deny it, because every time you resist, you're not just winning a moment. You're training your presence to become immovable. And once you become immovable, a strange thing happens. The interrogations decrease, not because people became kinder, because they became cautious. They sense there's no reward. That's the rebirth. You're no longer a man who seeks to be understood. You're a man who decides what gets access. There is a class of men who believe words are safety. They narrate, they justify, they clear the air. They explain their intentions like intentions are armor. They are the easiest men to control, because a talkative man can be steered without force. You don't have to beat him. You don't have to threaten him. You just have to provoke his need to be seen as good, and he'll start spilling. He'll volunteer context, soften his boundaries, negotiate his standards, and apologize for things he didn't do, just to restore comfort. Comfort is the chain. This is the final warning. If you keep explaining yourself, you will be managed, not always by villains, by co-workers who want leverage, by partners who want control, by friends who want your obedience, by institutions that want your compliance, by anyone who discovers that your self-image depends on approval. They will keep you permanently in review, always defending, always clarifying, always one conversation away from being put on trial again, and you'll call it communication. You need to understand what you're really broadcasting when you over-explain. I can be pressured. That is an invitation. The world doesn't ignore invitations like that. It exploits them. Here's the ruthless reality. The man who can tolerate discomfort controls the man who cannot. Interrogation creates discomfort, social tension, ambiguity, the threat of being judged. The weak man pays to escape that tension. He pays with words. He pays with concessions. He pays with posture. The sovereign man doesn't pay. He lets the discomfort sit in the room like a loaded weapon. That's why silence scares people. Silence removes their handles. Silence denies them narrative control. Silence forces them to face the possibility that they don't matter enough to receive explanations. And that possibility humiliates them. So they'll attack your silence with moral language. Why are you being like this? Just communicate. You're so cold. You can't take feedback. If you have nothing to hide, those aren't arguments. Those are hooks. They're trying to drag you back into the courtroom. Your final protocol is simple. Do not argue with hooks. A hook is bait. Bait is designed to make you react. Reaction is how they take your initiative. Do not justify your boundaries. A boundary that requires explanation is not a boundary. It's a request. Do not negotiate your frame. You state it once. You repeat it. You leave if needed. Because the moment you negotiate your frame, you announce you don't own it. Now for the elite standard, the line most men can't cross. Selection. You don't just learn to stay silent. You learn to become selective about who even gets access to your words, your reasons, your inner world. Most men give access to anyone who asks loudly enough. That's why they're constantly misunderstood. They're talking to the wrong audience. An elite man does not seek universal understanding. He seeks strategic alignment. If someone is not aligned, if they are probing, extracting, ranking, he doesn't educate them. He doesn't convince them. He doesn't recruit them into his reality. He removes them from it. That is the final power transfer. Your life is not a public forum. It's a private territory. You decide who gets entry. You decide what is disclosed. You decide when conversation ends. And if you want a clean rule to end this with, take this. When you feel compelled to explain, ask yourself one question, coldly, like a surgeon checking a pulse. Am I clarifying for results or begging for acceptance? If it's acceptance, stop. If it's results, keep it brief. If it's neither, leave. That's the doctrine.